here's how to learn a language on your own if you're on a tight budget. I did this when I was at the university and had no money at all. I was absolutely broke. And I have to say, I could only afford having one private class a week, which is not much, but I still managed to learn German in a year and a half. And so I actually think that's a pretty quick time, so I would like to share my tips with you now. So the first thing I would recommend you to do is to focus on speaking. Now, in language learning, there's a concept called student speaking time, and research shows it should be at least 30% of a class for progress to happen. So like I said, I could only afford having one private class a week, and I knew I had to make the most of it, right? So I thought, what if I make that 70%? So what I did was I asked my tutor if we could make our sessions all about conversation, and I would focus on reading, listening, writing on my own. And I actually made my first progress in the first 6 months. I could see I made a lot less mistakes and I started to speak a lot more fluently. So if you already have a tutor, try to see how much time is actually devoted to you speaking freely, without any worksheets, without any corrections, right? And if you don't, you can always check out my online language school where we offer personalized classes plus a free trial class. The second tip is to build a system. Like I said, I plan to do all the reading, listening, and writing at home on my own, so I knew I had to find a way to organize myself, because I had to get it done. Now, learning on your own can be challenging because there's no one holding you accountable and there are no deadlines, right? So it can be actually really difficult to get yourself to just sit down and start doing something. But what I did was I worked out a plan in which I did reading and writing on one day and listening and speaking on the other day. On reading writing days, I'd always start with reading first, and I would use different authentic articles and pull out some fancy words from it because I knew words or grammar constructions because I knew they could produce a good impression in the exam. And after that, I would immediately turn to a writing task and try to apply as much of that vocabulary as I could. And now by doing that, I actually never had to memorize words. I just used them and they stuck, right? So I really recommend doing that. As for listening and speaking sessions, like I said, I had one speaking session a week, and normally I would do nothing after such classes because my brain was just fried and I couldn't do anything, right? It was just sometimes overwhelming to have to speak for an hour in your foreign language, Right, but on the other days when I had to practice listening, I would always do it in a very focused way, and I'm going to make a separate video on how to do that, and I will link it in the description. The next tip is to expose yourself to the language as much as possible, but how you do that depends on your level. Because if you're a beginner, I definitely do not recommend jumping into Netflix series without any subtitles or anything. Why? Because if you're watching something you do not understand well, that means you have to pause and you actually want to understand something, right? The picture sometimes isn't enough. So you would pause and Google Translate almost every word. And that feels so frustrating. Trust me, I know that because I've been there, right? I would sometimes watch some movies and then I couldn't understand anything and I would have to Google Translate almost every second word. And I felt like I was so stupid, right? And it just demotivated me. So, to avoid that, I recommend you to actually stick to the material you get from your tutor or in your school class, whatever. But you have to make sure you master it fully. Now, how do you know that you have mastered it fully? Or how do you even master it fully? That's a better question. Well, you have to use this material that let's say you've learned some new vocabulary, right? And then you have to make sure you apply that vocabulary in your everyday life, in your everyday speech, or even in the next class, right? And if you see that you're still struggling with it, just go back to that unit, revise it again, because nobody else will learn it for you. This is actually your responsibility. And this is very important to focus on because most schools, this is especially important if you go to an offline class or something, because most schools do not focus on that. It is not their responsibility they don't care much whether you've made progress or not, because what they care about is that they can launch the next course next month or something, So please stop and make sure and solidify what you've learned. What if you're no longer a beginner and you still feel stuck and you still feel like you cannot speak, right? You're asking yourself a question, what am I doing wrong? I'm learning so much and it brings me nothing, right? Well, the answer to that question is still the same. You should expose yourself to the language, but use a different strategy, right? In that case, I would recommend you to find out what type of learner you are. Now, we have 4 types of learners, like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and a mix. And I really recommend you to find out more about that, right? Because it will help you, if you know which type you are, it will help you choose the right tools, and it will make your learning a lot less frustrating. Right, now if you want to know what learner type you are, check out my next video.